So it's been an interesting year as the folks at Blender have been up to some amazing stuff. The year actually started pretty nice with a couple of people joining the Blender Development Fund, from Dell Technologies all the way to Netflix Animation Studios and a couple of other ones that we actually haven't mentioned before. Now before we talk about the new development funder, let's actually take a look at some of the projects to look forward to in 2026, as 2025 actually went according to plan as all of the releases actually happened on schedule. And we're looking at releases like Blender 4.4, and these came with some amazing stuff like the animation slot, which was pretty impressive. A lot of people did love that one. Then we've got the Compositor CPU rewrite, which was pretty beautiful as well. Then we did get the Grease Pencil version 3 feature parity. Over 700 issues were addressed, and of course the video sequencer text editing had some improvement. Down the line we also got the release of Blender 4.5 the LTS, which actually came with more stuff. That was the first time we were seeing Vulkan with full support coming to Blender. Eevee received the faster startup, and Eevee shader compilation was also pretty cool. The Grease Pencil Compositor pass was also available. Then we got some enhancements to the animation timeline. There was also improvement to geometry nodes, which one of them being your ability to import multiple formats into geometry nodes. We also did get some updates to the video sequencer, as we did get a HDR support. The Compositor also got some interesting stuff as procedural nodes now made their way to it. And in this case, we also got nearly 400 bugs were fixed. 5.0 did come out sometime mid of November 2025, and these did come with a bang. Starting off, we got over 600 bug fixes across Blender. UV sync was also pretty impressive. We got new volumes in geometry nodes. We've also got improved HDR capabilities. And speaking of HDR capabilities, we also got the first introduction of ACES pipeline. We got the new storyboard template and workflow, which is also something I think is going to make a lot of sense with the projects to look forward to in Blender 2026. Across that, we did get some new modifiers, which is amazing, and these modifiers were spanning from geometry node based stuff, which included the array and scatter on surface. Modeling artists did love the array one. The scatter on surface was also pretty amazing. The Compositor creative effect assets were also added in 5.0, boosting the Compositor and making life easier, especially for those who are also looking at working alongside the sequencer. Animation and rigging improvements was also something that we did see, and with 5.0 we got the VR scene inspection with of course vignette and snap turn. And these are basically like major things that happened with all of the releases that we did see last year. However, there is a ton of nice cool features and of course things that we now take for granted that is currently available inside of Blender. So for 2026, here's some proposed projects for the year, and this one seems to be a little bit longer than what we had with last year, and this includes storytelling, the world building and asset creation. Animation seems to be making a comeback, lighting, rendering and compositing, collaboration, I love the sound of that, interactivity, platforms, and Blender Lab, which is something that is pretty new, and we already talked about that. So starting off with storytelling, as we all saw with Blender 5.0, there's some cool stuff happening with the brand new story tools, and of course we did see some stuff with the Compositor node modifier. In 2026, we'll possibly be getting more of the video sequence improvement, which would include GPU support, sequencer effects, media bin, ripple, and 3-point editing. And this sounds really cool. Currently, this is what the mockup looks like. This seems to be bringing a combination of what you have with your sequencer, a Compositor, alongside Grease Pencil into one place, making it easier for storyboarding artists to now make their storyboards right inside of Blender. For world building and asset creation, we'll be getting improved texture workflow with 3D brushes, and we might be seeing the beginning of layered textures in Blender. Layered texture is not as straightforward as the original design dates back to 2022, and from what we have here, this might not be happening this year, but features like the revamping of the baking workflows are on the horizon, so possibly we'll be seeing that. So for those who might be wondering, what does the original layer texture design looks like? What it actually looks like is this. So sometime in 2022 we did talk about it, and what we have here is more like a combination of what you get with Mari alongside Substance Painter. So right here you can see that we have a tiny bit of a node graph, which we might possibly be having some node effects to this, and of course we'll be having some masking. So to each of the layers you'll be painting, you can include a node graph, a mask to that, and some effects as well, as the idea here is for layers to work similarly to what you have with 2D image editing applications with blending modes. However, the texture layer stacks will correspond to the node graphs, and the node graph editor would now provide an alternative view of editing the very same texture. So if you work with Mari, you possibly will have an idea of how this one works. Currently, this is set to be coming sometime in the future, not necessarily this year, but what will be revamped will be the baking. So we might be seeing an update to the baking system in Blender with subsequent releases Now on the rendering side, this is the year MPR will shine brighter. And of course, sometime in May of 2025, we did see a publication that actually mentioned that the DeLongo studio and the Blender developers were officially doing some workshops towards MPR. And one of the core features needed for MPR is the ability to access and modify the shader pixels quickly. And folks at DeLongo really have an idea of how to work MPRs and also how to manipulate shaders to get exactly what you want. And potentially we might be seeing this come 2026. And of course, for those who like to test out Goo Engine, which is a branch of Blender that folks at DeLongo has actually put together, you can simply come through and check this out. The key features here includes 4 custom shader nodes that were added to Eevee and light groups. Animation seems to be having some cool stuff. We might be seeing Project Baklava. Now the initial goal is to expose this functionality in the action editor, which is potentially why we had the animation slot, and building on existing features, the design is being finalized and work is expected to start during the second quarter of 2026. Lighting, rendering, and compositing might also be getting some cool stuff too, as Cycle's texture cache is now in final stages of development, and this will make rendering with many high-resolution textures much more efficient. This will be followed by a new principal feature and a new open PBR node. As currently, if you simply go over to Blender 5.0 right now, the nodes that you have here when it has to do with shaders seems to be these particular ones, so potentially we might be getting a new PBR node pretty soon. And this will be really good for game developers. Something else which is also worth mentioning is the new approach to scene layered compositing. And this approach will be more like stacking effects in a video sequencer editor. And right here, he said that this is so similar that in fact that the effect designed for the sequencer will also work for the scene. And with the scene layered compositing, after you're done with the compositing, you can possibly turn off layers and maybe reduce the effect of setting layers, maybe just turn them down, increase them, and do all of that. And this very idea seems to be working hand in hand with the whole layer texturing that we might be getting pretty soon. So this is being compared to how the new geometry node array tool actually works, where the modifier lets artists focus on the big picture, while other stuff can happen underneath by just simply using nodes. This will bring about flexibility and efficiency. And in terms of collaboration, online assets will be arriving in Blender within the first half of the year, which will be opening the door to natively extending Blender with materials, collections, and more stuff from the internet. Blender Foundation itself will host a small library of assets on the platform, and third-party platforms can adapt that. So right now, what we have from the Blender extension platform are basically add-ons and themes. And for sure, there are tons of nice, cool stuff that you can get here. So if you're looking for pretty cool add-ons or even themes, you'll be able to get them here. So what this being said is later down the line, we might get an extension of the menus where we can find assets and other things from here. So in this case, if you go over to, say, for example, the add-ons, you can find a particular add-on, click on that, and then you can drag that and drop that inside of Blender. Hopefully, we're also going to be getting assets, so you can simply go over to the asset, click on that, drag that, and drop it. Something else which I think might also work in this instance is what we have with Blender Kit. So for those who have no idea, Blender Kit is just this beautiful add-on which you can use to find a ton of assets, materials and nodes and all that stuff right inside of Blender. So if you're looking for a specific one, you can simply go ahead and search that through and drag that into your viewport, work with it. You can drag in a whole scene, you can drag in asset. Of course, for those who like to also explore this one, I'm going to link that in the description as well. So what I think that the folks at Blender are thinking of doing might potentially also include linking this inside of Blender. So you know how we can go over to edit, go over to preference, go right here where we have our get extension. We might also be able to get assets as well, or maybe we might get a tiny button that will also work exactly the same way Blender Kit works. But for what it is, online assets will be arriving into Blender very soon. There's also updates to project setups which you can come through and read up, and finally overrides will be visited based on the late 2024 design, and a new design called Dynamic Override is here. So for those who like to read up on the overrides and stuff like that, you can come through and see this for yourself. And for virtual reality, location scouting began last year but was put on hold to focus on wrapping up of the VR locomotion movement. And VR locomotion movement has been getting some updates, especially with Blender 5.1, as we're getting the arc teleportation ray drawing for functionalities overhaul, which actually deals with you being able to move around your VR scene. And of course, we're getting some stuff like the new scale property, OpenXR support on macOS, and Vulkan performance as well, as this was something that we didn't really have with the previous release of Blender when Vulkan was announced. And part of the project coming in 2025 includes interactivity, which has to do with the hair dynamics. So there is continuous progress. We talk about bundles and closures. You might also be seeing some nice nodal stuff, which deals with both the hair solver and also particle systems and solvers. That was actually talked about in the declarative systems in geometry nodes. So for those who might want to get a better idea of this particular one. So I think this is being based off that, and these potentially will also be coming. And speaking about nodes, Modal node tools will expand the node-based tools to support modal operations. And folks at Blender are saying that it is now ready to move from prototyping to development, as this will also lay the groundwork of interactive mode of geometry nodes. During the last Blender conference, Ton actually demoed something that has to do with geometry nodes and physics, and these are pretty cool stuff. And I think these are the things that they're looking at in terms of interactivity. You also have some stuff that has to do with platforms, as we did talk about, beyond keyboard and mouse, looking at Android devices, touch devices, all of that stuff. And these are some of the things that will make Blender a bit more accessible to people, especially on the go. And, if you're thinking about working with Blender as a mobile tool, that would also come in very handy. We've seen some tools like ZBrush do it. We've seen some tools like Photoshop do it. So it's something that Blender is also considering doing. Of course, the initial focus now is on tablets, and potentially we might be seeing these not only ports to Android, but in the future, this might also come to iPad. And one final thing that they're currently looking at establishing this year is the Blender Lab, which has already begun. So the idea for Blender Lab is the development and experimentation of ideas, tools, and stuff that will be battle tested before they get integrated into the main branch of Blender. And currently, it is being said that the experiment aims to develop a modal context protocol server for Blender with communication handled via an existing Python API. And the Modal Context Protocol is basically an open source standard that enables large language models to communicate with external data, tools, and systems that would exist in Blender. And with this said, it seems like we might be getting a bit more of AI make their way to Blender. There are ongoing projects, in this case that deals with EV, pencil cycles, the multi-resolution stuff and all that. But for what it is, these are the projects that will be coming to Blender in 2026. And speaking about more money, more progress, and more tools, the folks at Arrowhead have just joined Blender Fund as corporate gold members. Now, for those who have no idea, Arrowhead Game Studio is a Swedish video game developer known for its cooperative multiplayer titles and a strong player-focused design philosophy. So this is it. Tell me what you guys think about this one in the comment section, and until I see you guys in the next one, peace.